those of you who don't know me, Sarah Ehresman, Director of Labor Market Intelligence at KentuckianaWorks. I'm here to give you an economic update on the manufacturing sector and the Louisville economy overall. I love questions, so feel free to take yourself off mute, or like I said, I have the chat up in the other screen, so you can drop it in the chat, and I'll try to leave some time at the end as well. So I have a lot of content to go through. I broke it up into 4 sections. I'm going to start with an overview of the local economy. I'll dig in a little bit on the local economy since the COVID-19 recession. I'll then move on to expanding the pool of potential workers and show you just a sum of the data that we can get out of the Kentucky Association of Manufacturers 2022 Wage and Benefits Survey. And as Mike said, the 2023 survey deadline is next Friday, so there's still like a week and a half to get your surveys in. It's really important that we get a sufficient sample size, because if we don't have enough employers from our region reporting, then we don't get our own regional report. We'll be limited to the state report, which is okay, but definitely not as helpful as having a report that's specific to our region. So please, please, please take the time to fill it out. If you have filled it out, which I see a couple of you have said, forward it to one of your friends, give them a little nudge. We need that sample size up so we can get our own report. And then I'll end with just a couple plugs for some LMI resources that you may or may not know about. So to begin, overview of the local economy. Here I have some fast facts on the Louisville MSA economy. You will see Louisville MSA throughout my slides. MSA stands for Metropolitan Statistical Area. It is defined at the federal level, and just to be clear, it reflects a 10-county footprint. So we're looking at 6 counties in Kentucky and 4 in southern Indiana to reflect sort of a Louisville economic region. So not just limited to Jefferson County, but definitely throughout the sort of metropolitan region. So a couple of fast facts I'll point out to you. 1.2 million people, making us the 45th largest metropolitan area. Among the population 25 to 64 in the region, 47% have at least an associate's degree or higher. The median household income is up to almost $70,000. And then the median hourly wage came out in 2022 at $21.33 per hour. So that means half of the region's workforce are earning almost $45,000 per year. Within the Louisville region's economy, 5 industries account for more than half of the local private sector jobs. So these are obviously industries that are very critical to the Louisville region's economy. Manufacturing is the 2nd largest industry in the region, just behind healthcare at 82,000 employees. Rounding out the list are retail trade, transportation and warehousing, which I'll sometimes call logistics, and accommodation and food services. So all of our good restaurants and such, and hotels. But relative to the U.S. economy, we see the most concentrated employment in logistics, manufacturing, and insurance. So even though healthcare is our largest sector, we have just about the right amount of healthcare employment you would expect for a metropolitan region our size. So the concentration of healthcare employment in the region is on par with what we would see in other metropolitan regions once you control for population size. But on the other hand, we have a lot more employment in logistics and manufacturing and finance and insurance than otherwise would be expected for a metropolitan region our size. So this concentration in manufacturing employment is about 1.5 times greater in Louisville than it is across the U.S. economy. We have a little bit less concentration, specifically in like professional services, construction, which never fully rebounded after the Great Recession, retail trade, and leisure and hospitality. Looking at job growth over the last 10 years or so, since 2011. 2011 is really when we started to come out of the depths of the Great Recession, and we can start to sort of measure job growth. So manufacturing job growth is here in the purple, the dark purple. And so since starting out in 2011, manufacturing really led the recovery in terms of jobs in the Louisville region. So we saw job growth being the fastest in the manufacturing industry for many, many years after the Great Recession. But about 2018, logistics took over as far as the fastest growing. And you can see in 2020, all of the sectors I sort of have listed here all took a dip in 2020, but not logistics. Their employment just kept on growing. And we all understand the reasons for that, right? Like we were all ordering things online, and the need for shipping and ordering and everything really took over. So manufacturing job growth is still the second fastest growing, but definitely not growing as fast as it once was after the Great Recession. Some fast facts on the manufacturing industry for you. We again have just over 82,000 jobs across 1,800 unique establishments. This accounts for 14% of private sector employment in the region. Again, we see that job concentration as 1.5 times greater than the nation. Manufacturing is about 16% of GDP, of the region's GDP, and it's the largest contributor to regional GDP. Looking at wages in the manufacturing sector, or typical manufacturing jobs, I should say, manufacturing occupations, we can see that very common manufacturing occupations like machine operators, inspectors, assemblers, welders, CNC operators, machinists, and industrial machinery mechanics, many of them have wages close to or above the region's median wage, which is good. We want to have competitive wages in the region. Reflecting on the living wage model. So the living wage model is the minimum threshold needed to maintain economic self-sufficiency without using any public assistance programs and without facing severe housing or food insecurity. So not having to make really tough choices about, do I pay my utility bill or buy food, but really just like the minimum threshold that you need to pay all your bills, get by, not use public assistance programs. And I mean minimum threshold, like no vacations, no saving for retirement, not going out to eat, like a very low cost food budget. So it's also, I think, really helpful for employers to be aware of the living wage. You can look at this data at livingwage.mit.edu and see it for different like household formations. And so one that we definitely pay attention to is one adult with no dependents, which is $16.11. So again, if we go back to our median wages for manufacturing occupations, we can see all of them that I have listed here, the selection that I have listed here, pay more than the living wage for an adult with no dependents. However, many of us are not single adults with no dependents. So if we look at the sort of family supporting wage, which is 2 working adults with 2 children, each adult would need to earn almost $24 per hour to, again, provide that minimum threshold for their household prosperity. And there we see less success in the manufacturing wages. So really just the industrial machinery mechanics that have that median wage that's above the family supporting wage. So just again, to be mindful that within our region, if we want families to be economically self-sufficient, they have to earn enough to provide for their family. And in this case, working in the manufacturing sector might be difficult unless you had the other adults earning more, right? So mindful of that. Okay, I'm going to dig in now to actually, I'll pause. Sorry, let me turn my phone off. Any questions so far since I broke it up into sections?
Sarah, I'm curious with that. Can you put the slide back up of the minimum? Yeah. So do they factor healthcare costs into that, or health insurance or anything like that?
No, it's a good question, and the answer is no. This is just the pay that you get on your paycheck kind of payment. And this is the 2022 survey where we did see quite a bit of wage increases over the 2021 survey across occupations. So the 21, I wouldn't be able to cite specific occupations, but the overall median wage for the region was about $19 per hour. So we saw a $2 increase, which is a pretty substantial increase over just a single year. But no, it's going to be just the earnings that you take home.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Good question. Any other questions for now? Oh, well, I'll keep moving then. So I want to look a little bit about what's gone on since the COVID-19 recession and the local economy. The COVID-19 recession was officially 2 months in March and April of 2020. Here we're going to look at manufacturing employment, monthly manufacturing employment. That's not seasonally adjusted. So we are going to see some of these peaks and valleys that take place just as sort of seasonal needs arise. What we saw in the manufacturing sector was in those 2 months of March and April of 2020, the region lost 11,500 jobs, just those 2 months. Compared to the Great Recession, which was the year and a half, the sector lost 11,000 jobs. So you lost just as many jobs, a little bit more actually, in just 2 months alone. It took a while to get the jobs back. But since the bottom out of April 2020, the region has gained, the manufacturing sector has gained 17,200 jobs. So the sector did fully rebound its employment levels. It actually fully rebounded in about the second quarter of 2022, in the spring of 2022, which is when we really saw the economy kind of coming back all the way. This is the same chart, but for just all non-farm employment. So all the jobs on the payrolls in the region. And here again, we saw just the total employment fell off a cliff. We lost 103,000 jobs in just those 2 months. Since then, the region's regained all of the jobs lost, 115,000 jobs brought back. The region fully recovered all of its employment in the third quarter of 2022. So the manufacturing sector recovered just slightly faster than the overall number of jobs in the region, but just by 1 quarter. And what we've seen sort of across the board is that even though the total number of jobs has fully rebounded, it's not been evenly distributed across sectors. So when we look at the employment, the average employment now compared to the average employment before the 12 months before the pandemic, this is kind of some of the data that we can see here. So logistics, the employment in logistics is up 16% over the employment levels that they had before the pandemic. And the logistics sector, I mean, they fully rebounded in the third quarter of 2020. You know, like their rebound was super fast because they didn't really lose employees that many to begin with. And then they came back, you know, with a vengeance, hiring everyone. And so look, I've made this chart since 2020, and logistics has been at the sort of the top end of it since I've started making this chart. Manufacturing, on the other hand, here is finally up on the right side here. Employment levels are up 3%. As I've said, employment did rebound in the manufacturing sector, but it took a lot longer. For a long time, it was down on this end where we weren't really seeing the recovery in the manufacturing sector. And whereas compared to professional and business services, construction, even those also rebounded pretty early on after the recession. On the other hand, leisure and hospitality is still down here, you know, so even though, again, I've said the region has recovered all of the jobs lost during the pandemic, that doesn't mean that they're the same jobs, right? It's not all the same jobs that come back. So in particular, employment in leisure and hospitality is still down 4% today as it was compared to where it was before the pandemic. So again, there's been winners and losers in this sort of economic recovery. Government here is going to also include the public education system, which we know has really suffered a staffing shortage as well. And so again, their employment levels not back to where they were before the pandemic. But that's not true in manufacturing. So good news for you guys. The unemployment rate here, unemployment rate tells us for the population who is working or who wants to work, like how many don't have a job. Right now, the unemployment rate is really low. It's 4%. Yes, 4% is not as low as it has been, where it's been down like even below 3%, I think once. But definitely between 3 and 4%. This is non-seasonally adjusted data though, so it's important to keep in mind that there are sort of these like peaks and valleys. But overall, you can see 4% is still very low. This is the unemployment rate for the Louisville region since it's been recorded by the Department of Labor. And here I just plotted 4%. And so you can see for the majority of the time, the unemployment rate is higher than 4%. And so right now, you know, if you're looking for a job, you probably have one. And that's really been the sort of tight labor market that we've experienced since the economy sort of really kind of fully reopened in starting at the beginning of 2022, end of 21. So the unemployment rate is a reflection of the size of the labor force. So the size of the labor force captures people who, again, are either working or actively looking for a job. So we don't want to count people in the labor force who have like no interest in working, right? Like if they're retired or they're in school and they don't need to work while they're in school, like we don't want to count them as being in the labor force. So we only count people who are actively looking for a job. So we consider the size of the labor force to be our sort of pool of potential workers. So we saw the size of the labor force decline during the recession. And after starting in the recovery, you know, we were sort of on this like positive trajectory. And again, this is non-seasonally adjusted data. So we're going to see peaks and valleys here that are just sort of occurrences that happen based on seasons. And in particular, before the pandemic, we saw our peak size of the labor force in the summer months. So in July and August are these peaks here each year. And what is interesting, what's going on here, so in the first and second quarter of 2022, which might have actually been the last time I was here talking to you guys, I was like, the size of the labor force is back. We've fully recovered. Like the size of the labor force in the first and second quarter of 2022 was as large as it was in the first and second quarter of 2019. But what happened is that in the summer months, in the third quarter, where it should have peaked, it actually started to go down. And here again, we just got the July data, and instead of going up, it's going down. And so this is definitely something I'm keeping an eye on because it's interesting. Typically in the summer months, we see young people perhaps come into the labor force, young adults. Mothers will sometimes come into mothers with young children will sometimes come into the labor force in the summer months. And so we don't have good data on sort of the characteristics of our labor force at this sort of high frequency rate. So it's hard to know exactly what's going on in the local economy without looking to the national data. But the national data is actually showing a little bit of a different picture where they're seeing an uptick in the labor force participation rate, and ours is kind of flat, maybe even declining. So it's definitely something I'm keeping an eye on, and I don't have a lot of good information as to explain why it's happening, but it is a concern, right? Because this is our pool of potential workers, and in the summer months especially, we would expect that to go up. Now, one theory that I have is that because employment levels are still down in the leisure and hospitality sector, that maybe there's just not as much demand for that sort of temporary employment in the summer, because we did obviously see a lot of closures of establishments in the leisure and hospitality sector. So that could be one sort of factor at play. But at least for the time being, it would seem that the labor market is kind of starting to even out, because this is showing monthly online job postings. This is for this is for the entire region, all sectors. And we were seeing sort of record high numbers of online job postings, again, when the economy was kind of fully rebounding in 2022. And it started to go down too. So the demand for workers is also starting to sort of level out. Not that it's like super low. I mean, it's still, this is what I would call average, right? Like if we go back and look at what we were seeing before the pandemic, it's kind of just getting back to normal levels of online job postings. The same trend is holding for the manufacturing industry. So this is monthly online job postings for manufacturing in the region. And we, again, can see that demand for workers is sort of moderating, which is kind of the feedback that we're hearing across the board. So if this is not true for you, I'd love to hear that, but that labor demands are not the number one issue anymore. I mean, it's still probably like number 3, but like it's still in the top 5, right? But it's maybe not number 1. I want to show wages also, as we were sort of discussing before. So this blue line is going to be showing average hourly earnings for all private sector workers. And then the purple line is production employees in the manufacturing sector. So this isn't going to include C-suite. It's going to be floor production workers. But it would include, since I get this question sometimes, it would include like first line supervisors, but not, again, like upper management. So anyways, what we see is for all private sector workers, a substantial increase in their average hourly earnings, really sort of beginning in about the third quarter of 21, and really sort of having an accelerating impact into the third quarter of 22. Whereas at the same time, wages for production workers were increasing, but not nearly as quickly or as fast as we saw for all private sector workers. And so when we think about, how I said before that the manufacturing sector did not rebound all of their employment levels as quickly, one thing that could be at play was that workers were opting out into other jobs, perhaps in logistics or construction, for example, that we're seeing wage increases that were happening faster. So workers have had a lot of leverage in terms of picking employment opportunities that really serve their needs, and in many ways wages is a leading indicator of that. So perhaps one of the reasons that we didn't see the manufacturing sector rebound as quickly was because the wage growth was not occurring as fast. But even though labor demand might not be the number one reason, their number one concern, I do know that it's always a concern and definitely something we will always want to talk about. And so I want to spend some time talking about expanding the pool of potential workers. And one way that we really try to highlight that is that if you provide a good job opportunity, people will come to it. People will enter the labor force. We saw people entering the labor force when wages were increasing. If there is a good job opportunity that fits the needs of that individual, like they're more likely to take it, right? And so we've really tried to focus on these good jobs principles, which are, this framework was developed by the U.S. Departments of Commerce and Labor to sort of help employers think about what are the principles that make up a good job. And so the categories include recruitment and hiring, benefits, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, empowerment and representation, job security and working conditions, organizational culture, pay, and skills and career advancement. Now, this framework is great, but the problem is that for someone like me who spends a lot of time looking at the data that comes out of the U.S. Departments of Commerce and Labor through the Census Bureau and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, hardly publish on any of these things. They talk about pay, right? I've talked about pay. There's a little bit of data on benefits, but not really much. And that's it. So it's really hard to have a conversation, I think, or at least have a framework to have a conversation about this good jobs principles without good data. Well, fortunately for us, the Kentucky Association of Manufacturers conducts a wage and benefits survey every year that asks a ton of questions that get to many of these good job principles. And fortunately for us, last year we had a sample size that was big enough to have a report for the KentuckianaWorks region. And if we want another one next year, then we need a larger sample size. Again, deadline next Friday. Here's the link if you need a reminder. Mike will send it out after the meeting. This report is like super long, super in depth. I'm going to give you just some of the things that I thought was interesting in it, but hopefully it helps spark some ideas about how a product like this could help your place of employment become more competitive in terms of attracting jobs or in terms of attracting workers because you offer really high quality jobs. So the first thing that stood out to me was that a third of manufacturing companies do not have a PTO program, no paid time off. The largest category of paid time off is going to be vacation time. And so there are employers in the region that do not offer vacation time. I would say that this is not an indicator of a quality job. So, this is something to consider. Other benefits that we can look at, 100% offer medical insurance, although some of them are self-insured policies. So there's a framework to consider that as well. 97% offer retirement benefits. Only 80% offer vision insurance. We provide supportive service dollars for people that come into the career centers who qualify for them. And one of the largest categories that we spend money on is for eyeglasses. Eyeglasses can be quite expensive. And so, this vision insurance can be quite helpful for your workers. 56% offer tuition benefits. So again, one of the good jobs principles was career and skills advancement. 53% offer company provided learning and development opportunities. So types of professional development, again, leading to skills and career advancement. 25% offer paid paternity leave. Manufacturing is a male dominated industry and men have families. And as the mother of a toddler, I would have really liked if my husband had paid paternity leave. It can really make a difference for that family. So just another sort of consideration. And when it comes to retention, you're going to have a loyal employee for life, I think, with that kind of policy. Going on to career advancement, when the question is which training methods do you use for employee training and certification, please check all that apply. And so most employers are using on-the-job training methods, followed by leadership and management and online training courses. Only about a third are using the community college system for their sort of career training advancement. So again, another good piece of information to kind of think about, what are other employers doing in this sector and how could I potentially do more to help my workers advance their skills and proceed along their career trajectory. And the thing is that the public sector actually provides a lot of incentives and resources to employers to help with career advancement. So they provide money in terms of work-based learning programs, apprenticeship programs, the Kentucky Career Centers that we oversee and operate, federally funded. The state has put in money into the trains funding and to the Bluegrass State Skills initiative to be able to help employers offset the cost of helping their workers gain additional skills and train. But what we're seeing is that employers are not really using these incentives or resources. So 45% are using work-based learning programs. But like these trains money and the Bluegrass money, less than, about a quarter of respondents are using this money. And I just want to point out that, policymakers in Frankfurt are walking around thinking like, we've solved this problem. Employers have the resources that they need to provide career advancement for their workers. But if employers are not using these initiatives, then, that's money left on the table that, you could be helping your workforce gain the skills. They will be more loyal and, you'll have lower turnover rates as a result. And that money is just sitting there. No one's using it. So I'd love to be able to see, especially some of the mid-sized employers, that participate in this advisory committee to be able to come together and kind of think about, like, if I send 3 and you send 3 and you send 3, then we have a class that's big enough to take advantage of this trains funding, because it's out there and it's just being unspent, just unfortunate. I want to talk about, they have a bunch of questions on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so only about a third of the current employers have initiatives to increase diversity within their place of employment. The general method in which they do that is just outreach to minority communities, 91%. Some are doing job fairs. Here, a third are doing mentorship programs targeted toward minority development. Love to hear more about that. I don't know if any of you are the ones that responded with that, but like that could be a huge topic of conversation, I think, for this advisory committee to kind of think about what are ways that we can promote DEI programming within the manufacturing sector. Because the 63% said no, they don't have any initiatives, but 30%, so like, let me just draw another piece of the pie here. 30% said they're interested, but they haven't started. So there is some interest in this type of, in these types of initiatives, but, you know, it hasn't gotten off the ground yet. So, again, thinking about how your place of employment can sort of gain a competitive edge. I mean, really kind of doubling down on DEI initiatives and becoming that welcoming place with a workplace culture that supports, you know, people who are, you know, Black, Indigenous, or other persons of color, could really make your place of employment like special. Because clearly, not that many employers are doing it right now. I'm going to end on childcare. No manufacturing organization provides childcare assistance options to their employees. 0%. So not on-site childcare, not you know, partnering with the childcare facility, not providing any kind of subsidies to their workers. So 0% are offering childcare, and turns out that no one's really interested in it either. So 3% said they anticipate offering childcare assistance in the near future. 6% are interested in research, and 94% are not interested in offering any kind of childcare assistance. And again, this is a space where policymakers have they're thinking that they've helped solve this problem through the employee assistance program. No, the employee childcare assistance program, and in which an employer can give a subsidy to a qualified worker to help offset the cost of childcare. So let's say you as an employer provide $200 a month to a worker to offset the cost of their childcare. Well, then the state will match that. So then they get another $200 from the state. So suddenly they have $400 to spend on childcare, which can be like half of your childcare bill for one child. So it, you know, it is a substantial opportunity in terms of, again, getting money, public money from the state. You know, you can get a tax credit for subsidizing childcare, and then the state will leverage that to make it even more impactful. So again, this is really a space where I think employers could step up and really get a competitive edge when it comes to attracting women in particular, but you know, men too. And I will also point out, I wanted to mention there was a article in the Wall Street Journal a few months ago, and they had someone from Toyota like heavily featured in it. And they talked about, you know, the on-site childcare that they have at Toyota, and they basically, you know, it does not need to be on-site childcare. And the people at Toyota even sort of recognize that the best solution, honestly, is to subsidize the cost and give it to the worker, because most often workers want childcare that's close to their home, not close to where they work. And it just gives them more opportunity to find a childcare setting that's close to where they live. And it also, you know, really reduces the cost and burden for the employer to not have to deal with on-site childcare facilities, but instead just, again, provide it as another benefit, just as you do tuition benefits or whatever, and give that to a qualified worker. So Kylie here has a plug. I'm going to come back to you, Kylie. Okay, so again, thinking about the demographics of the workers in the manufacturing industry, we can see a quarter of current workers, you know, identify as Black, Indigenous, or another person of color. So again, thinking about those DEI initiatives and ways to increase that could really give you that competitive edge, because that's, you know, about a quarter of your current workforce is already in that racial identification group. And then by gender, again, we're looking at about a quarter, 28%, are women who 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 need childcare most likely, or you're gonna be able to attract more women into the field who when you're offering these childcare assistance. So really kind of thinking again about like we could be the most family friendly manufacturing company in the region. Like that could give you an incredible competitive edge when it comes to attracting workers. Because ultimately the manufacturing sector and honestly the labor market in general has a big demographic problem that it's facing, and that's an aging workforce. But it's happening faster in the manufacturing sector than it is happening across the entire labor market. So in manufacturing, we can see that solid 25% of the workforce is age 55 and over. We also see a higher representation of 35 to 54 in manufacturing as compared to the overall workforce. So, 70% here are going to be over 35, and as you are dealing with that aging workforce and you're looking to, you have this underrepresentation of people under 25 and an underrepresentation of 25 to 34-year-olds who are most likely to be in their childbearing years. If you're trying to think about how you can increase this part of the pie while this part of it kind of falls off into retirement, I think there are a lot of good elements in the CAM benefits and wage survey to really help you think creatively about how you can offer these different types of benefits, different types of career advancement. Again, going back to those good job principles, I'm going to scoot over there really fast, thinking about all of these good job principles. Yes, pay, we're always going to talk about pay, but the CAM survey can really give you a lot of food for thought, I think, and how you might improve some of these other indicators of a quality job. And again, the survey deadline is next Friday. Please, please, please. This data, I mean, I've only showed you like 4 pages. This is like a very long, intense survey. And I realize that it therefore takes probably a considerable amount of your time to fill it out. But then the end result is that you can have a report that really shows you a lot of information about the manufacturing industry in our region. I mean, I didn't even touch on the wage section. I just talked about the benefits, right? There's a whole section on wages I didn't even go into. So again, please, please, please take the time to fill that out if you haven't already. Okay, I'm going to wrap up with just a couple resources, a couple plugs for us if you don't know about them. We have a new resource to explore careers at KentuckianaWorks.org/explore. What you'll see is we have our 6 leading industries highlighted at the top, including manufacturing, of course. So when you click on manufacturing, you'll be taken down to a list of 10 in-demand occupations. Let's say, for example, you click on the welders, and it will take you to a page that shows you all kinds of local labor market information. It will show you things on earnings, on daily tasks, relevant skills, training programs, top employers, and more. It's obviously going to be geared a little bit more towards our job seekers and student audience, but as far as employers go, if you ever need a quick reference for wages for a particular occupation, I would suggest this. If you ever want a quick reference for, I need to connect with like a training program, like I wonder if JCTC has a graduating class in this coming up soon or whatever, like it will show you the training providers in our region that sort of prepare you for that occupation. So those are 2 key data points that I think could be helpful for employers. It will also list employers who are posting the most online job postings. So if you want to know who your competitors are for a particular occupation, you could also find that on this at this resource. It's really user friendly. I was going to do a demo, but I wanted to talk more about other data, but it's really easy to use. And if you have any questions about it, just let me know. And then the other plug is for the LMI website, KentuckianaWorks.org/LMI. Here you will find lots of key LMI resources on what's going on in the labor market and in the economy. The latest research that I've been digging into to get more in-depth stories on childcare, or immigrants, etc. There's a newsletter you can sign up for. And just like on the homepage, just to give you an example, is like a map here of our 13 county footprint of KentuckianaWorks and Southern IndianaWorks, and you can just see quickly like the latest unemployment data, the size of the labor force, et cetera, just on a little interactive map. And so there's all kinds of sort of dashboard kind of stuff out there to help you understand what's going on in the labor market. My contact information is also on that page if for some reason you can't find me. And then finally, we're on all kinds of social media, and we're doing a bit more labor market data in our social media. So if you don't follow us on one or all 5 of these, please do. Okay, so that's it for